I'd like to call this, that's tiny. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Jacksonville Planning Advisory Board to meet. At this time, we'd like to have the Pledge of Allegiance by Steve Forney, followed by the Invocation, Al Keys.
Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, thank you for this privilege to serve the community through the work of the Planning Committee. Thank you, Lord, for this privilege. Thank you for this community. Lord, this evening we remember those people that are suffering from the coronavirus and also those victims of the tornado in Tennessee. We pray, Lord, that they will recover. They would have peace of mind about us all of it. And remember also, Lord, those that are placed in danger by during the rescue and during the medical treatment. Bless them, Heavenly Father. Give them that strength and give them courage to do that. And as we make our decisions this evening, Lord, give us wisdom to make what is right and appropriate for those decisions. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Okay, everyone has their agenda in front of you. Any changes or corrections to the agenda? Hearing none, a motion to approve the agenda is in order.
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Lasan, second.
Second.
Al Keys, sorry, he was closer. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, like. Motion passes. Review and approval of the minutes from February 10th. Any changes, discussion? Hearing none, a motion is in order.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Forney, second.
Second.
Thomas on the second. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, like. Motion passes. We're good. City Council update.
Thank you, Chairman. On the February 18th council meeting, the City Council approved 2 Unified Development Ordinance text amendments. I believe both of those were before you last month. So the first one was pertaining to some clarity to the landscaping section, specifically large trees versus canopy trees, to where there was no confusion. The second one was an adjustment to the sidewalk requirements, the bicycle and pedestrian facilities, that allows staff to a little bit more flexibility to consider basically infill developments and to make better decisions in terms of having a sidewalk kind of installed that'll probably likely not connect for a long time. It gives additional flexibility. And then on the March City Council workshop last week, we discussed some some fencing allowances around amenity ponds. We're going to talk with you about that tonight, and I'll be happy to let Councilman Warden add any additional information or cover anything that I may have missed with that report.
Thank you, Brian. Old business there being none, we'll go right to new business. Map amendment. Jeremy, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the Supervisor Board. Agenda item 8, the lone item tonight, is a proposed map amendment rezoning for 1528 Mill Branch Road. The proposal is to rezone from residential single-family 7 to corridor commercial. This application was submitted by Northwood Methodist Church. You'll notice the vicinity map showing the location at the northeast corner of Gum Branch Road and Henderson Drive. This is the aerial photographer of 2008 aerials showing the location. The adjacent properties across Henderson Drive, the Lorica and the Walgreens, Jacksonville High School directly across the intersection, and to the south, Handy Mart and later New Market Square Shopping Center. To the east, Abundant Life Church, and to the north, directly to the north, is Horizons Med Spa And then you'll see on 1-7 place, the single-family residential. And this is the zoning that matches all those properties descriptions. You'll see that the church property, the project site, is currently zoned residential single-family. The adjacent properties to the north, east, west, and south across Gun Branch Road are all zoned corridor commercial. This is the CAMA feature land use map. The light blue that the project site is on is actually is designated institutional. When the city's land use plan was adopted several years ago, it was pretty much a mirror of what the current zoning was or what the current land use was. You move to corridor commercial while more intense in your office and institutional zoning still takes it forward to aligning with the CAMO land use map. However, at a future date, when we do update the CAMO plan or the map itself, we will take this into consideration into making proposing to change the CAMO land use plan to something that's a little more succinct with tonight's proposed rezoning if it is approved by City Council. This is the proposed zoning map, and it shows that if changed to CC, it will match again the adjacent properties. It's in line with that intersection. Just to give a little background, while this should have no impact on your recommendation, what brought this about was the church wants to redevelop a sign for the site. And being zoned residential, they are limited in size and height and number of signs, and felt that a commercial zoning would give them more flexibility, allow them a more modern sign that matches a commercial corridor. And staff agrees that rezoning the property not only would suit their purpose, but continues to meet the city's future growth pattern. And the planning department is recommending approval with findings of fact A through J being found in the affirmative, and that the rezoning advances the public interest by creating more development opportunities if the church would ever leave or find another property. It corrects a non-conforming situation, meaning that the church predates our current zoning, and if it remained residential, if they were ever to do the expansion or renovation that triggers site plan, they would have to seek a special use permit. If rezoned to commercial, it now becomes a conforming land use. And also that if this proposal goes forward, it would, as I mentioned before, the zoning would align more closely with the CAMO land use plan. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have, and I believe the church has a representative there just in case there's a question that I cannot answer. So, yes, sir.
Question. When we look at the original of this, you're sitting here going like, how did that ever get to be residential single family to start with? So was that something that the areas around changed, and originally all that was residential single family, and then as more development happened along Gum Branch Road and Henderson, they applied and got changed to commercial corridor or something else?
I was going to say, my research shows that this tract was actually a residual of the subdivision development there, Aldersgate and 1-7 Place and all that. It was a residual left over, and historical data shows that it's always been residential, so it's just carried that over going forward, and it's never been changed. The church has never had an issue that required the necessity to change it. They haven't expanded, that they needed to get beyond the residential zoning. But it's been like that for at least the last 10 to 15 years in my research leading up to the staff report.
It's probably been that way since 2000. And churches, I think back in 2000, before UDO, I believe churches were permitted in the residential zone. And there really was no kind of push for us to kind of make the change. It probably wasn't realized, to be honest with you. And it's, a question came up recently about a sign, and, we recognized it was probably an area that needed to be changed anyhow, because it really doesn't make sense to be RSF 7 there at that corner. I mean, you can make the same argument across the street with the high school, it needs to change the institutional or something like that, but schools are permitted in that zone, so if it's not really causing them any issue, it's not necessarily a front burner kind of item for them.
Now, is this subdivision already fully developed, or the vacant lots over there?
The representative from the church may be able to speak more to it, but I do not believe the church is looking to subdivide their property, or, they may potentially grow and need more footprint. And if this rezoning goes forward, they could work with the city through a site plan and building permit process. This rezoning would make it easier for them to do that.
There's also a large ravine at the rear of the property that has floodways, so part of that's not developable anyhow.
Is that jagged line?
Yes.
Sir, that's that very dense forested area that.
In fact, Horizons Med Spa is actually Coastal Carolina Internal Medicine.
Okay,
Yeah, that's who's there.
thank you.
Yeah, so the map's a little out of date. Yeah.
Any other discussion? I mean,
Pretty straightforward.
it does seem straightforward. And I remind you that when you make your motion to,
Yeah.
please look at your writing.
Yeah.
To make all the correct statements. Yes, sir, Steve.
I'll go ahead and make a motion if it's appropriate.
Go ahead.
This Planning Advisory Board recommends that City Council approve the rezoning request, accepting the evaluation found within the staff report based on findings of fact A through J being found in the affirmative. The rezoning advanced the public interest by creating more development opportunities, corrects a non-conforming situation, and closely aligning the zoning with the GAMA future land use map.
That's a mouthful. Good job. Can we get a second?
Second?
Second by Mr. Keys. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, like. Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
You're up.
So, I don't know if this is a report or a discussion, so I'm gonna go with discussion, because that's what the agenda says. We won't worry about what the slide says. So, one of the things that we talked about with city council, last week, that we wanted to have a discussion with the planning board pertains to the UDO amendment pond fencing. As you all may remember, well, I'll give you some history. We're talking about retention detention ponds, these stormwater devices that are required for, cleaning the stormwater that runs off our streets and parking lots. So in 1998, city adopted a pond fence and landscaping requirement. And not only did the city say that we wanted future ponds be fenced and landscaped, but we amortized them. We gave them 5 years to install a fence and install landscaping per our code. We haven't amortized anything since 2000, which is when I started. So there was 2 things that we amortized. We amortized some signage painted on signs and this landscaping that we're talking about here tonight, along with the fencing. So that's a pretty significant deal when the planning board and city council basically makes a change, then we're gonna make people retrofit their sites to comply with those standards. So it was near and dear to the council at the time that we wanted these ponds be fenced and have landscaping. In 2011, city council amended the code to allow or to require that the utility ponds, which are ones that we now require to be set back off of the roadway, that they are required to have a fence. But if you put them near the road, they have to be built as an amenity. And one of the things that the amenity requires is that you are prohibited from fencing around those ponds. We still require the landscaping, but fencing is prohibited. And it really boils down to, it was about aesthetics. What they look like right next to the highway. So we've recently run into some issues where we've got several owners that desire to install fencing around these amenity ponds. We have to tell them that you cannot do that. So we've got one that's in violation right now because they did it before asking if it was okay to do it. And we've got some others that are interested in installing fences. So the concerns are, as I have on the screen, is liability concerns. That's one of the items that a lot of the folks have expressed, is that by not having a barrier, a child could wander into the water and drown. Aesthetics, as I mentioned prior, just a few moments ago, as well as which ties back into the liability, is the public safety concern. So staff has been in discussion about, okay, well, is there a compromise to where we could write some standards to give somebody the opportunity to fence an amenity pond, provided that it looks nice? So staff's recommendation is that we would allow amenity ponds to have a decorative fence installed, that we would create standards and an approval process for that decorative fencing. And some of the things that we're thinking of right now is maximum height of 4 feet, that it would have to be a powder-coated metal or similar material approved by the city manager, and that wood fences, vinyl fences, chain link fences would be prohibited. So, as I stated, our recommendation is to allow these ponds to have decorative fences installed and to create standards for this process. So when you say, well, what's a decorative fence? I've got some slides tonight that's going to show you what a decorative fence is to me. May be different for you all, and may be different for Jeremy, but this is kind of, I won't say Jeremy because we've kind of put this together, we worked on this together, so this is kind of what we consider a decorative fence. And I'm going to go through a series of pictures. And some of the pictures that I'm going to show you are just examples. It may not be something that we want to see, it's just an example of a fence. And there's a few of them that you're going to see here in a moment that may not really fit in, but I mean, they look nice, it just may not kind of fit within what we would want to see here in Jacksonville. So if you'll notice, most of these are about 3 to 4 feet in height. And one of the questions that was asked early in staff's discussion was, well, what does the state code require for a swimming pool? Well, the state building code requires that you have a 4-foot fence around a swimming pool. I like a 3-foot fence because I think it kind of eliminates, or doesn't eliminate it, creates a barrier, but also it kind of lowers that profile to where it's able to blend easier. Here's the city cemetery's fence that was recently installed. So now we're going to kind of get into some examples where you got some brick columns and some stonework. And obviously, I think it's I don't have an exact price, but you can assume that these type fences are probably a little bit more than a wooden fence or a chain link fence. But if you start getting into the ones with the brick columns, it's probably even more expensive. And that's part of the standard component to where, are we going to require that? If so, what's the frequency? What's the spacing between the columns? The one on the right here with the lighter colored bricks, probably a 6-foot fence. Here's some, you've got stucco on the right, and then looks like just some sort of a decorative block on the left. Combination of block wall and fences here. So staff's recommendation is that we move forward to create a standard to allow the amenity ponds to be fenced with a maximum height of 4 feet, and that it be a powder coated metal or similar material, and that those types be prohibited. And what we wanted to do is basically kind of get the planning board's feedback on thoughts. Is this something that you all, think makes sense? Any concerns, suggestions that we haven't necessarily thought of?
What would be an example of one that's not conforming now?
Well, I'd rather not use an exact location, but there's multiple ones on Western Boulevard that they're legal nonconformities because the fence was there prior to the UDO.
Gotcha.
So if we want to, I'll pick on that one because it's not anything they did, it was a result of our code changed. So it's not anything they did. The one in front of Best Buy, that was a pond that was required to be brought into compliance, and the fence is there, and they have not chosen to remove that fence.
Will they be required to update to the new decorative fence?
That is not what we are proposing. We are proposing to allow anybody that wants to construct a new fence, that they have to meet these standards. We're trying to allow several developments that want to install a fence a means to do so, but that it look nicer and be more decorative than a chain link or wooden fence. Because right now it's not allowed. This would allow them something. So for those folks that want to install a fence, this gives them an option.
Would vegetation be an option, vegetation alone?
That's currently allowed. So I mean, if you wanted to plant, I don't know, some sort of a prickly bush, like a holly bush or something like that, and you wanted to basically line the pond, you can do that today.
And will a similar height be required, 4 feet, 3 feet? Or
Well, I
could there be higher trees covered?
The standard today is that you have landscape and shrubs and trees. We're
Yes.
not proposing to necessarily do away with that. Although we may want to eliminate the landscaping requirement and just say, hey, we want a fence and trees and no landscaping. I think that's part of the dialogue, because we haven't wrote the code yet. You know, what would we like to see? I mean, if somebody's gonna spend additional money to make a decorative fence, I don't know that we want it covered up by greenery. But I would like to see, personally, I'd like to see the tree requirement remain in place. Maybe eliminate the shrub requirement that goes around the perimeter of the pond. But today, it's a fence and landscaping together if it's a utility pond, and it's just landscaping if it's an amenity pond.
Listen to what he's saying. He said they're proposing to allow. They're not gonna require, if you have an amenity pond, you don't have to put a fence in. You can do the landscaping and whatever, but there are a couple business people who think that they have some sort of a liability issue, or maybe their insurance company has said something to them. If they want to make themselves feel better or to satisfy their insurance company, we need to allow them some way of at least addressing that issue. We don't really want to set them up to where they're going to have to change insurance companies because their insurance company won't continue to insure them because they don't have some sort of fence around an amenity pond. So, but for those who have no issues, you know, they don't have to do this fence. They don't have to spend that extra money. So.
Well, that maybe was kind of driving the issue. If the insurance companies, you know, on a renewal policy comes back and says you will have fencing. Okay,
Right,
well,
and we
now-
don't want to.
And then we can set up, you know, with it's under an amenity, if we just make it decorative, so they're not, you know, getting the wood, and which is higher maintenance anyway. I mean, I like the visual appeal of what there, but eventually it's gonna happen, because, you know, anyone with swimming pools, their insurance companies will not insure you if you have a diving board, okay? And now, you have to have a fence, but if you have a diving board, homeowners insurance policies, a lot of them are dropping that. Used to be a slide, now it's actually a diving board. So if you want a new person wants to install a swimming pool right now, they're going out there looking for insurance on their homeowner's policy, they're getting denied. You know, because they have they have a diving board, and they're actually, insurance companies come in taking aerials, because you may say, I don't have one, they'll come an aerial and take a shot, and then they'll just cancel your policy right instantly. So that's happening now. I know, you know, of that happened to somebody I know. So they're stuck with the policy the way they are. They're trying to get a cheaper homeowner's policy, but because they do have a pool and they do have a diving board, now you know, all the companies are backing out. So they consider a diving board a liability.
Right. Now, one thing just to kind of, because it's something that I've personally observed, and I don't know how that plays into with insurance, but you've got places, even in North Carolina, I can think of the Waterford at the Commons, I believe is what it's called, down in Leland, North Carolina. They're waterfront developments. They build ponds and lakes in the backyards, and they sell lakefront property for houses in Florida. About every subdivision you go in Florida, at least the ones I've been in, they've got a water feature. Disney World has lakes at their resorts without fences around them. So I'm not going to sit here and say that there's no liability issues, because I don't think that would be fair for me to say. I would say, though, that there are examples to where they are not fenced.
But I think there's a difference between residential and commercial too. So I think that's where you might get into that. So at least you do have some business owners who are concerned, but they want to do something. but they need some guidance. And I think, what you're all suggesting sounds really good to me. So, not saying you have to, but
Right.
here, if you're going to, here's the guidelines.
But one other thing to keep in mind is the way that we set up the code back in 2010, 2011, when a development is proposed, now, what I'm about to say sounds easier than, in some cases, what is in reality. But they could put the pond in the back right corner, away from the street, behind the building, and they can put a fence around it all day long. Now, if the water runs from that top right-hand corner at the back to the front, to try to get the water to run back there is also going to be very expensive. To change the grade and pipe it back that way when they could let it naturally flow, or take the pipes from the back to the front without having to elevate or super elevate the site. So there's options that, and there's one, without saying which development is, they had that opportunity and they chose not to, and now they want to put a fence up after the fact. They knew about it beforehand. They chose not to do, they also could do sand filters. They could do, below ground treatment. Once again, that's a little bit more costly than a retention pond. I don't know if it's more costly than this fence. We're just trying to provide another option that doesn't presently exist. And we feel like this is kind of a compromise to where prohibited today, but we'll allow it, but we want to see a nicer fence along that roadway.
Right. You're trying to find a nice happy medium
Correct.
compromise, which is a great thing.
Well, Ryan, I noticed that you put in a maximum height of 4 foot, and I was thinking about two things. One, the fence, of course, is designed from a liability standpoint. You would think it's designed to keep little kids out. 3 foot would probably do that just as well, and it would make it easier for the adult to get over to get the child. And that's what I'm concerned with, is that if the fence keeps little people out, but it also keeps big people out, like me. I might not be able to get over a 4 foot fence. Now, I probably can. The second is that the top of the fence should not prohibit someone from going over in case they need to. And if you have spires on the top of the fence, like I think at the cemetery, now granted, it's not a water feature, so you don't have to get over an emergency to go get somebody, but that would make it hard for somebody to go over without getting stabbed, to get a kid who had gone through the fence, So I'm just kicking that out as.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about that, so that's a good point. The first part, I would agree with you. My thoughts were 3 foot as well, or 2. But I think because of the code for the swimming pools, that's kind of why we said, well, if the code requires a 4 foot around a swimming pool, we'll just leave it at 4 foot max. I mean, but we're not, we'll use Wilmington, for example. From what I understand, they don't require fencing around ponds. They do have some prohibitions that are out front. So I kind of look at this the same way. We are saying if you're going to put a fence up front, then we want it to be a certain way, but we're not telling you that you have to fence an amenity pond. And I know that there's a fence behind the Costco in Wilmington where they've got a retaining wall. So, I mean, it's about a 6 or 8 foot drop down, and there's no fence around that. But they could fence it, because that's actually one of the reasons why I reached out to the Wilmington planners to find out, because I saw that picture. Because that's what Jeremy and I, we look at other examples and say, okay, well, how'd that happen? And we reached out to Wilmington, and they don't require that. So this would be a new tool that those that want to have it for insurance reasons could install it. We just want to make sure that it doesn't look like the run-of-the-mill chain link fence like we had in the past, which is kind of why we got away from allowing it in 2010, 11. So this would kind of be, okay, well, now we've heard people say they want it, but we can write in the standards, something to where, there's a way for an adult to scale the fence. I mean, we could certainly make it 3 foot, but I was just telling you, that's why we came up with 4. So if it's the board's desire to max it at 3, I mean, that's certainly something you can kind of tell me tonight, and when we bring it back forward as an amendment,
You probably could do 4 if you have some place, like I noticed on this, you could probably step on that bottom rail, on the one on the left, you could step on the bottom rail and use it to help you get over. Or,
Yeah.
there are ways to do the 4, but make sure that it's scalable by an adult.
You just keep a smooth,
Yeah.
flat surface on top. You know,
Picture on the right does a pretty good job of the flat part of the top, although you may not be able to get your foot in that top part.
Yeah. Does that look like a 3-foot to you?
That's what
I thought it was.
I'm gonna guess it is if that sidewalk is 3 foot. Down the
Yeah, maybe
back.
a 4 then.
it's probably 4.
You think so?
I think so.
I think most of your fence companies have a standard for it.
Would we have any concern about the spacing of the uprights for the fence? You know,
Are you talking about the pickets
the
basically?
difference in between, I know for baby cribs, they have to be a certain minimum width or maximum width.
We can certainly look at the width that's in the building code for swimming pools and apply that standard and say they gotta be that wide,
I think it's
or
4
no
inches.
wider than that.
I think it's 4 inches.
We can add that to the standard. That way it's clear.
Probably is full.
Well, you have something uniform, so whatever, required for a swimming pool, just make it uniform right across the board, and that way you don't get into, well, turn the page, let's go back, what was it? Just keep it standard. I mean, even your fence companies are pretty much standard across the board. So, when it comes to building them out, is how they make their materials.
You'll probably see this probably next month, so we'll continue to work on that and bring it forth to you as far as the text amendment to create an allowance moving forward. And then the next part of the report, I'm gonna let Jeremy come up and talk about the census 2020, just to kind of remind everybody, we want to be counted here in Jacksonville.
So, Assistant City Manager Glenn Hargett wanted me to update the board on the census, as he's kind of coordinated the city's participation in it. But as you know, 2020 is a census year, and we'll go through these slides. So on the last census, well, first, the census is set to count every person in the U.S. Every person is living at your address on that day that you post your report for the census. As of the last census, Onslow County lost $402 million in shared revenue from the state and federal government because not everyone was counted. $675 billion were allocated during the previous 10 years based solely on that census count. The census matters because those numbers help determine how many seats we have in Congress, how our state houses and Senate seats are arranged, and even for Jacksonville, how our wards are drawn. And it could not be easier to fill out your census. You can do it online this year by phone, or if you want, traditional paper. Your data is safe. The census workers take a lifetime oath to never reveal your personal information. Know that they cannot reveal your personal data with anyone. And it's our civic duty to participate in the census. At least 22,000 people not counted in the last census. Jacksonville dropped in rank from 10th to 14th in state population, and NC lost a chance for an additional congressional seat. Potential 2020 effects. NC shows 10% growth, boost ranking. NC wins 14th congressional seat. Onslow County tops 200,000 population, redistricting Congress, state, and House State Senate seats. March 13th, census invitations should start arriving at home. Awareness and education phase, which we are currently in. Motivation and participation phase, and you'll start seeing more media through the city's outlets. And then the reminder of those who have not response phase through June 28th. We all count here, and so it is, again, our civic duty as citizens of North Carolina, the United States, and primarily Jacksonville, to participate in this year's census. The U.S. Census Bureau is recruiting hundreds of thousands of temporary positions across the country to assist. You can go to www.2020census.gov/jobs. Starting Onslow region pay is $15.50 an hour. Again, if you want more information, go to the website on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our reports for the evening.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Any other discussions? Hearing none, a motion to adjourn is in order.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion by Steve Forney, second.
Second.
Oh, second Al Keys. You don't want to stay here all night?
No.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed like. Motion passes. Meeting adjourned.